I do feel badly for him. He served the country. He was a general. But just remember, he was approved by the Obama administration at the highest level. And when they say we didn't vet, well, Obama, I guess, didn't vet, because he was approved at the highest level of security by the Obama administration.
As Russiagate unfolds, the blame game continues. This time it's over Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, who was dismissed after an historically brief tenure of just 24 days, ostensibly for misleading White House officials about conversations he had with the Russian ambassador. Donald Trump, however, is doubling down on blaming former President Obama for authorizing a security clearance for Flynn, despite the fact that it was Obama who fired Flynn from his job as head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. But NBC's Andrea Mitchell reports the White House and Trump's transition team did do a background check on Flynn, in addition to his already approved security clearance. Joining me now is Nayyera Haq, former State Department spokesperson, director and activist Rob Reiner, and Malcolm Nance, executive director of the Terror Asymmetrics Project. Thank you guys for being here. And also the author of, let's not forget, The Plot to Hack America. We got to sell those books. Guys, this is sort of a stunning development, and I'm going to come to you first on this, Malcolm, because Andrea Mitchell reported last night, Rachel Maddow had it on her show, that in fact this claim that the vetting should have been done by the previous administration is absurd on its own. But it turns out there actually was a vet of Michael Flynn after he wrote an op-ed clearly favoring Turkey, who he was taking money from, and after the administration, including Mike Pence, were informed that he was doing work for Turkey. What do you make of the development that they did vet him, but they're claiming they know nothing about it?
They are trying to confuse something which is very simple amongst people who have held a top secret SCI security clearance for a very long time. When you get your security clearance, you are given that clearance, and then that clearance is valid for 5 years. Every 5 years, they do an update. Once you've had that update done, you have the ability to be given access to top secret or whatever level information that they allow. Mike Flynn got his security clearance 5-year update done in 2016, which is just a standard thing that was performed at the Defense Department. However, the vetting for the White House is a completely different animal. That is done by the White House staff, and even though he held a top secret clearance, he could have been restricted to his access. And there are two entirely different things that are going on here. They're talking about Obama doing the security clearance, but in fact, his access to top secret information is allowed by the White House as the new convening authority that is responsible for him and giving him information. So they should have vetted him much, much more carefully, but he still has his clearance. I mean, even now, he may still have his clearance as opposed to his access.
And, you know, Nayyera, to that very point, you have all of these people who should know that, right, in government. Malcolm Nance just explained it to us. Susan Hennessy, who's a Brookings fellow, who was at the Lawfare blog, explained the exact same thing that we just heard from Malcolm Nance, that there's always a reinvestigation after you've been out of access for a while. He'd been fired from the DIA, so he was out of government. But inside of the Trump White House, you still see this doubling down on a sort of ignorance of the process. Jefferson Sessions, who is the Attorney General of the United States, who is the one member of the Trump team with governmental experience, he was a United States senator. This is him attempting to explain away the non-vetting or vetting and then forgetting that they vetted of Michael Flynn. This is Sessions on Friday.
He's been, was part of the White House advisor on the national security issues. So we need to do a good job of vetting that, but that's a complex issue, and I'm not sure anyone could be expected to find that.
Are you comfortable with the level of vetting that was done?
Well, I'm comfortable that they're working hard to do vetting, but it's obvious that oftentimes you don't catch everything that might be a problem. Well, they work hard on vetting. They do the best they can. It's impossible to know everything.
The first was on GMA and the second was on NBC. He's making it sound as if it's impossible to figure out how to vet the person who's going to be the national security advisor to the President of the United States.
Here's some additional facts. CIA, DOJ, FBI, and White House are all involved when it comes to vetting and approving and background checks for somebody as high level as a national security advisor. So there is a ton of information out there. The difference is, at some point, somebody has to make a decision of what they consider to be ethical and what will pass. flags were raised. Clearly, this is the entire Sally Yates issue of her having talked to the White House, potentially having been asked to leave herself because she was questioning the credibility of their choices. But someone is making a political choice that even though you have somebody who has been taking money from the Russian government, who has taken money from the Turkish government, has then turned around and advocated directly for their interest in policy, right? Not that they're just doing that independently, but trying to insert that into our own government and policy system. Somebody made a choice that that's okay and acceptable. So this is a entire administration-wide new standard of ethics and, frankly, undermining the system of checks and balances to be able to have people who are knowingly working for foreign governments in our government at the highest levels.
And Rob, Rob Reiner, part of this does feel like it's just sort of white noise obfuscation. E.J. Dionne just said in our last block that one of the things that this administration has been pretty successful at is throwing up so many sort of data points that it's impossible to fix on one of them. In the case of Michael Flynn, which is probably the most damning story to them so far in Russiagate, they've walked it back to the point where it's just almost so confusing that people forget he was writing op-eds in January before the inauguration. Do you think that they've been successful in obscuring this enough that it's helped them, I guess, weather it for now?
Well, they certainly have obscured it up till this point, and that is certainly their intent. But the truth ultimately will come out. It may take a while, and it is a confusing story, but let's make no mistake about it. This man, who is the head of our country, is a pathological liar, and everybody around him is lying. There's no other way to look at this thing. Not only did we know about Michael Flynn, there were a number of articles. There was a letter written by the House Oversight Committee. It was well known what Michael Flynn was doing. He was fired by Barack Obama. So that is clear. And what E.J. Dionne said is absolutely true. The one thing that they have been successful at so far is obfuscating the biggest single story that is permeating this country right now, and that is the invasion of a foreign power, a hostile foreign power, into our democracy. And the Michael Flynn story, aside from the fact that he was taking money from Turkey, from Russia, from places, and clearly that's a criminal behavior, the main part of this story, and something that we haven't even talked about, is why? Why, with the White House knowing full well that this is who he was, they still appointed him National Security Advisor. And that goes to the story of why Sally Yates has been kicked off the stage. She'll now come back on, and that is she overheard Michael Flynn talking to the Russian ambassador Kislyak about getting rid of the sanctions. That's the story, and that's where we have to start thinking about the undermining of our democracy.
And let's take the story to the next level, which is it's not just Michael Flynn. I mean, you have people like Seb Gorka who are there, who is an avowed Nazi sympathizer, and he is in the White House apparently doing our counter-extremism policy. So the cognitive dissonance is there and present, and trying to cover that up is part of the administration agenda.
Yeah, and the exact question that Rob Reiner just asked, Elijah Cummings sort of asked that in a similar vein, and I think it ties in what you were just saying a minute ago. Let's listen to Elijah Cummings asking, I think, what is the salient question here about Michael Flynn in the White House.
I honestly do not understand why the White House is covering up for Michael Flynn. I don't get it. After the president fired him for lying. These guys are playing games. And when you see Mr. Spicer, you can tell him I said that today. They're playing games. If we cannot come to a conclusion there and get the documents, then there'll have to be subpoenas.
Malcolm, at the end of the day, it is not about Michael Flynn. This is a White House that hired him knowing who he was and what he was doing. The vice president claimed he had no knowledge, had no idea what he was doing. When he did, they were all informed of it. Sally Yates informed them of it. As Nayyera just said, they knew what was going on, as Rob said. How do we get to the question or the answer? Who coordinated and made it such that this many people with ties to Russia wound up either in that campaign or in that White House? Do you feel confident that we will ever get to that question, that answer?
I believe we will get to that answer. And, you know, to give credit to a component of the White House, there are two White Houses going on here. You have the General McMaster, General Mattis White House, which apparently has none of these problems. Everybody is vetted. People are cleared. And then you have the political White House, which are all of the actors who came in before McMaster's took over as National Security Advisor. And they have components of their lives, actions, things that they have said, which stem from just being patently political to, in some cases, being extremely, extremely tied to a hostile nation and possibly to a hostile intelligence agency.
Right.
That story up to the minute McMaster is hired as National Security Advisor, everything before that is going to be a dramatic story in the history of the United States and quite possibly the worst scandal. And the only thing Donald Trump has going for him is that he has McMaster and Mattis to maintain the continuity of this government.
Yes.
At this point, and they are the only benefit that again he has in his interest.
I think it's clear that this is the biggest story and biggest scandal in a presidential administration, probably in U.S. history. It's very confusing. It's hard to follow, but we really appreciate always having you guys to help us do that. Thank you, Nayyera Haq, Rob Reiner, and Malcolm Nance. Appreciate you guys. And